Hey everybody, thank you so much for tuning in to Cityline Online. We are thrilled to have you with us. And if you are new and you're hanging out for the first time, man, we want to welcome you. We pray it's not your last time. It doesn't matter what city, what state, what county you are watching from. We are just honored that you chose to spend time with us today. My name is Jack, and I get to be one of the pastors here at Cityline, and we want you to enjoy your time with us. We think there's no better way to start or end your day than right here at Cityline Online. In fact, today we're going to be wrapping up a discussion that we've been in over the last few weeks. It's a conversation that we've called In My Feelings. And it's been a significant conversation for us because we're going below the surface. We're going below the surface and we're addressing the areas where in our lives that if we're honest, there's some wounds, there's some scars, there's some unhealthy areas. It's places that we've got all the feels, but we don't know what to do with that. Many of us, we want to avoid it and push it away. We want to disconnect it with our relationship with Jesus. But the good news about Jesus is Jesus actually invites us to bring all that stuff to Him, to bring everything that we are dealing with, our emotions, our feelings, all the things that have happened in our past, to bring those to Him and allow Him to do a new work in our life, to create health and wholeness in our life. That you and I, we were never meant to live these fragmented, disconnected lives where we compartmentalize everything in our lives, and then over here we've got our spiritual life. No, Jesus says, I'm inviting you to bring all of yourself to me. I've created the whole of you, and I care for all of you, and I want to bring health and wholeness in your life. So although we're coming to an end on this particular series, here's what we're hoping. We're hoping to actually launch a movement. Because the whole idea behind this series is to learn what it looks like to continue to pursue emotionally healthy spirituality. Understand me when I say that emotionally healthy spirituality is so important. Christian spirituality and the integration of emotional health are incredibly important. If they are disconnected, it turns to unhealth and toxicity in our life. In fact, the whole thesis and point behind this series has simply been that it is impossible to be spiritually mature while remaining emotionally immature. We want to know what it looks like to lean in and be all that God has for us. If you didn't catch any part of this series, or maybe you missed a week or two, I want to encourage you to go online. We've talked about some really important things that really help us hone in on what does it mean to be emotionally healthy and spiritually mature. We've talked about things like our true self. We talked about confronting the past. We've talked about the journey through the wall. Last week, we talked about losses and grief. All significant pieces that we have to understand better and learn how to navigate through with Jesus' help so that we can continue to grow and develop into all that He's created us for. Here's what we want to do today. Today, as we round out this series, I want to talk about something big. I want to talk about kind of the key piece that separates emotionally healthy spirituality from unhealthy spirituality. I want to talk about a key piece that's the difference between a spirituality that is actually marked by hypocrisy or pretense, and a spirituality that's actually marked by genuineness and brokenness. Most of us, we desire to live our lives with more joy. We desire to live our lives with more peace and more love. But there's an important barrier that often gets in the way, and that is the immaturity that exists in the ways that we often relate to other people in our life, the way that we see other people. So the goal for today, and I want to state it very clear, is that we're learning to love well. We want to learn what it means to love well. Another way you can say that is we want to take positive steps towards growing into an emotionally healthy adult. Growing into emotionally healthy adulthood. And I get it. Love is complicated. Anytime you think of love, or you try to process love, it's interesting. Everybody has a definition of what love is and what love is supposed to look like. If you close your eyes and if you dreamed about it, right? Like everybody has this grandiose idea of what love is supposed to feel like, how love is supposed to respond, and how you want to be loved. In fact, Jesus actually talked a lot about love. Love was important for Him. Matthew 22 kind of helps set this up. I want to give you the context because Jesus here, He's been teaching, He's now being questioned, He's constantly being questioned about the things that He's saying, and there's an expert in religious law. This religious law was the law according to Moses, the Mosaic law found in the Old Testament. He's saying, I want to know what is the greatest command? If you didn't do anything else, what is the one thing that you are supposed to do? And it's fascinating because by this time, when Jesus is being asked this question, the Mosaic law had comprised about 600 and some odd different commands that they were trying to hold people who were following God accountable to. And so they asked Jesus, out of all of that, what is the most important? And listen to Jesus' response. Jesus replied, "You are to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, and all your soul." Right? He says it's very clear. It's this idea of this connection between heart, soul, and mind. It's integrated. It's all of you. It's every part of you. You are to love God with all that you have. He continues. He says, this is the first and greatest commandment. I want that to sink in for a second. That's the first and greatest commandment. And the second, he says, is like it. You are to love your neighbor as yourself. Love your neighbor as yourself. And as kind of a period at the end of the sentence, Jesus hones in and he says that all of the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. That everything you've heard scripturally, everything you know about, your Hebrew Torah, everything you know, he says to this religious expert, about what you've heard from the prophets of the past, right? He says everything that they communicated, you need to understand that it all hinges on this key piece. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind. Love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus is revealing God's heart for humanity. Jesus is revealing God's heart for you and I. His whole purpose is this understanding of love. It's the understanding that as an emotionally mature, Christ-honoring adult, we recognize that loving well is the essence of spirituality. That loving well is what God has actually called us to do. But that requires a connection with God. It requires a connection with ourselves. It also requires a connection with other people. To be clear, he says you love God with everything you've got. You hold nothing back, right? This is not just your thoughts. This is not just with your ideas. It's just not just with some warm feelings about God. No, he says you love God with everything you've got, everything that defines you. You give it to God as a way of honoring him. You hold nothing back. But he also says you love your neighbor as yourself, to which we say, okay, well, that's where it gets complicated. That's where the struggle exists. But I want you to notice something that is so important. You might want to write this down. Okay? There is no separation or disconnect between these two commandments. Jesus says they go together. They're inseparable. You can't do one and not do the other. Right? You can't love God and now say, well, I have a right to not love people. He says, I want you to understand that these two are connected, and everything hinges on these two. Why? Because Jesus always integrated the presence of God with the practice of loving people. He always integrated his presence, right? His power, his love with the actual practice now of how we live that out as we relate to others. As we live in our families, as we live in our marriages, as we live with our coworkers, as we live with our neighbors, as we come and go in the various domains that we find ourselves in, that this is to be lived out. That's what love does. It forces you to walk out what you say. It forces you to walk out what you believe. It forces you to walk out what you say you know about your God. But here's what I know. It's easier said than done. Right? It's easier in our dreams than it is to practice. But I want to be clear why this is so important. 1 John 4:8 says, the one who does not love, understand, does not know God, does not love God. Right? Get that very clear. The one who does not love God, because God, he is love. So God at his very essence, God at his very core is a God of love. If we are following God, God's love should then in turn change us and transform us into being a people that chooses to love others. But if there is a disconnect, then the problem is not necessarily, hear me, with others. The problem is with your relationship with God. Because God is love. And if you do not love, then you do not obviously love God. And why could that be true, or why could there be a disconnect? Here's what I want to focus in on as we kind of start to unpack this today. I want to focus on two myths that we tend to believe. Two clear myths that sometimes we tend to believe in our faith, or in this idea of following Jesus. And the first one is simply this, that I accept Jesus and now he is Lord of my life. So growing into an emotionally mature adult, well, that's just the natural outcome, right? I mean, it's just supposed to be that easy. I mean, I gave my life to Jesus. I said yes to Jesus. And so now suddenly I'm just supposed to get it right. It's just supposed to be the natural outcome that I'm going to be now emotionally mature. Here's what I need you to understand. Saying yes to Jesus does not automatically transform us into an emotionally mature adult who actually loves well. Saying yes to Jesus, understand, is probably the best decision you could ever make in your life. But the goal in saying yes to Jesus is that you would begin to follow Jesus, which in turn means that you begin to live more like him. You become more like Christ. You love like Jesus. To which you would say, but wait, hold up, time out. I heard about this good news. And the good news says that once I give my life to Jesus, the old is gone and the new has come, right? You remember that from week 1. The old is gone and the new has come. I've been made new. I'm a new creation. Understand me. You are a new creation. You have been forgiven. This is what God has done for you. He's extended his grace to you. But understand that this new creation, that is your position in Christ, not necessarily a representation of how you act or live. Right? That has to actually be learned. Think about this. Discipleship is a process. Discipleship is a process. I mean, think about Egypt, right? Going all the way back to Israel. They were enslaved in Egypt. 400 years, God sends Moses to deliver them out. And as he delivers them out, they're wandering in the desert. And it wasn't just a day's journey in the desert. It wasn't just a few months' journey in the desert. Guess what happened? It was 40 long years in the desert going round and round. Why? Because although they were God's people were emotionally immature. Yes, God, he rescued them out of Egypt, but now God had to take them through a process to where he could get the Egypt out of his people, right? But yet they continued to complain. They continued to whine. They continued to wander. But God continued to stay consistent with the process of growing them into those people that he created them to be. That's so powerful, right? That you understand that God is willing to continue to do the work in you that he has started, and he is faithful to complete it. The second myth that, if we're not careful, that we believe is that as a Jesus follower, right? A Jesus follower's ability to love those around them, well, it's qualitatively different than those outside of the church. It's just natural, right? We're supposed to have a different quality to our love than those who would not be following Jesus or who would be considered far from Jesus. And don't get me wrong, I mean, it sounds good. And that is our hope, is that our love would be marked by something that actually looks different. We so bad want that to be true, but we do know that that's not always the case. You've seen it. It's frustrated you. It's why the church is known for being hypocritical. It's why the church has been blasted as of late for making so many different mistakes. It's because there's a huge disconnect. Because if we're honest with ourselves, we're not always better at loving others, although we absolutely should be. Sure, don't get me wrong. Many of us, we've learned how to have the look of a Christ follower. We've learned how to go through the motions of following Christ. You know what I'm saying? We can put up a front in front of others, but let's just be real for a second. Behind closed doors, right? What does love look like in your marriages? What does love look like in your parenting? What does love look like in your relationships with your friends or your close acquaintances or with that coworker that you can't stand? What does love look like then? In fact, what does love look like in an election year? Oh, wait, time out. Too soon? Right? We're not ready to talk about that yet? Okay, what does your love look like? See, it's easy and it's tempting to have a spirituality that looks good on the outside. Everything is perfect. Everything is well put together, but yet there is nothing beneath it. There is no roots, right? There's something nothing exists behind it. In other words, what I'm saying is that oftentimes we can believe all the right things. We can attend church. We can lift our hands. We can worship. We can read our Bible. We can quote our favorite scripture, right? We can live respectable lives, but at the same time, we can become so caught up in the world around us. We can become so caught up in the societal issues. We can become so caught up in the busyness of the world around us that now suddenly there is this disconnect that we don't have time to grow in our relationship with God. We push God to the side, or we say, God is what I do on the weekend. God is what I do on a Sunday. No, God is what I do for an hour and a half on Sunday. No. God is what I do for 30 minutes on. We begin to diminish that relationship with God, and then our lives begin to suffer. Listen, I want us to understand something so important today. Part of growing into an emotionally healthy, an emotionally mature follower of Jesus Christ is learning how to apply practically and effectively the very truths that we say that we believe in following Jesus. What am I saying? I'm saying, for example, how do you learn how to be quick to listen and slow to speak? Or how do you learn how to be angry but yet do not sin? How do you learn to speak the truth in love? How do you actually live out being a peacemaker? How do you actually live out not bearing a false witness against your neighbor? How do you actually get rid of all bitterness and slander and rage and anger? Those things that hold us back from actually loving well. Now, let me just ask a deeper question, because that's the whole point of this series, right? Remember, we're going below the surface. We're addressing the iceberg. Let me ask you a deeper question. Over the last 12 months of your life, what has your love for Jesus as well as your love for others, what does that actually look like? What does that look like? I want that to just sit with you for a second. In other words, what has been on display? What kind of love has been on display in your home, outside of your home, on your job, outside of your job, at your church? What does that actually look like? I ask because honestly, for me, I would say that over this last year, especially for those that follow Jesus, would say that they love Jesus. I would say that more than any other time that I could think of, even in my short existence, right? I would say that people, we've really been given insight to people's true colors. To what people really think and believe. We've been given a visible, tangible understanding of what's first in people's lives in many ways, of what's taken precedence in people's lives in many ways. We've been given visible, tangible evidence of the things that have taken the place of God in a lot of people's lives. These idols or these lesser gods that maybe we didn't know had such a hold on us, but we soon realized that, man, maybe those things mean more to us than our relationship with God does. And unfortunately, over this last 12 months, what we've realized is it's been a year of picking and choosing whom we will love and who we will not love. It's been a year of picking and choosing who we're going to cancel and who we're not going to cancel. And unfortunately, it's been a year of choosing to pick and choose who we're going to absolutely promote, but yet also who we're going to degrade and attempt to absolutely destroy with our words. I mean, think about what love has looked like over this last year. Yet, you know what's so interesting about that? Is nobody would deny that to grow spiritually, that a spiritually mature, emotionally mature Jesus follower is one that actually loves well. So there's an understanding of what that could look like and what that's supposed to mean, but yet at the same time, there's a disconnect in practice. There's a disconnect in understanding. Few of us have learned how to practically live this out, how to actually implement loving well in our life. And I think it has to do with our emotional maturity. If we remain disconnected from God, if we're not growing in our relationship with God, if we forget that love is more than just feelings, and we underestimate the depth of the bad habits that you and I carry into relationships and in dealing with others, if for some reason we struggle to fully receive the love of Jesus and allow that love of Jesus to be fully consumed in our heart to where we actually begin to love ourselves, if we cannot love ourselves, it's going to be impossible to extend love to other people in our life. Or if we're not maturing in our ongoing relationship with God, it makes it entirely impossible to build a sustainable, maturing relationship with anybody else. Whether it's your kids, whether it's your spouse, whether it's your friends, right? No matter who that is. Oftentimes, if we're not careful, we remain emotionally and spiritually stuck. And so I want us to kind of assess. Today's about self-assessment. I want to assess where we are. I want to assess what might be going on in our life and where we might find ourselves on kind of a spectrum. We'll just call it kind of this tangible inventory of 4 emotional stages. Parents, you might understand this. You might see this actually living out. Here's what I'm saying. Maturing physically and maturing intellectually, it's fairly easy. It's just kind of natural. People, they start at a baby and they go from infancy to child to adolescent to adulthood. I mean, it just kind of naturally happens. We learn things along the way. It just seems to kind of naturally happen. But maturing emotionally, that's a whole entirely different story. That's a whole entirely different process, right? And so let's just think about this. I want you to assess, if you're following along in your notes, hopefully you have some notes. I think this assessment is important. I want to describe kind of these 4 phases to us, and I just want you to mark an X where you might find yourself. And I know it's gonna be kind of hard to embrace. It might be kind of interesting to kind of think and see yourself in that way. But here's what I want you to do. I want you to lean in to this moment and assess where you are currently. See, chronologically, we understand how growth happens, right? We say chronologically, if we have a baby, chronologically, we know that the baby can only do so much for itself. That a baby, it really can't communicate. That when a baby is frustrated, or when a baby is hungry, or when a baby is in pain, the baby can't tell you, hey, I'm in pain, or hey, my left arm hurts. So what do? They actually cry out, right? They cry out and they try to get the help that they need somehow, right? But they do it in an emotionally immature way. It's the same thing with our emotional life, if you think about it. Some of us might find ourselves here in the emotional infant stage, that we look for others to take care of them. These kinds of people are saying, I need somebody else to do it for me. They're not willing to take responsibility. They're actually driven by instant gratification, or they use others to meet their needs, right? It's kind of this emotional infancy. It's not much different than the chronological babies that we see in our life. But yet some of us, if we're not at the stage of emotional infancy, we do kind of naturally kind of gravitate towards this understanding of this emotional child. Now think about children, right? Like chronologically, like a child, when they get older, they can communicate now, but they can't communicate well. You know, they can say and use some words, but they still find it really hard to be expressive with their feelings and to identify fully with what they're feeling. And so instead of expressing the feelings and identifying the feelings, what do? They tend to act out. Parents, you know what I'm talking about, right? Yeah, your kids tend to act out. Another phase that we might find ourselves in, that we have to be honest about ourselves, is an emotional child. An emotional child simply is the understanding that we're content as long as we get what we want. We're content as long as we get what we want, but we complain, withdraw, manipulate, try to take revenge if we don't get what we want, or we just simply unravel quickly from stress or disappointments in our life. We can't get in touch with our emotion. We can't process with that. We're not willing to allow God into that space, and because we remain emotionally immature. But yet there are others who might find themselves at a different stage. Maybe it's the emotional adolescent. Now just think about adolescence chronologically, right? As a child is growing into adolescence, isn't it true that we kind of define adolescence as, in terms of kind of like this rebel stage? Right? It's a bit more rebellious. It's kind of defiant even, right? It's kind of like, you know, you got a kid who's 13, 15, maybe 17 years old who says, you know what? I know better than you because you can't tell me anything, right? Like I've lived long enough now that it doesn't matter how old you are, that I know exactly what I need to do. But yet it's that same person that it's like they can be super loving one day, but then feels like they hate your guts the next day. Right? You know what I'm talking about? It's this weird stage of adolescence. Sometimes it's the same for us emotionally. We reach a stage of emotional adolescence, right? Where it says that we tend to be defensive, right? We're threatened or alarmed by criticism. You know, somebody can't give us feedback because we don't know how to take it. You know, we can't deal with conflict well, right? We just don't like it. So instead, you know what we do? They pout, they gossip, maybe they become judgmental, or better yet, they just become inner focused. They become preoccupied with themselves. They just say, you know what, I'm just going to shut everything out. I don't need anybody. I can just take care of myself. Now, let's just be honest for a second. Where do you find yourself in this spectrum? Does any of this, I know it probably doesn't, but let's just try to be honest. Like, does any of this sound like us or where we've been or what we're wrestling through currently? It's important for us to make this assessment because if we can't identify where we are, it's going to be impossible for us to begin to grow, to begin to take next steps. This is not to to call you out. This is not to beat you up. This is helping you to understand that there are some areas in my life that if we continue to avoid them, continue to look past them, then guess what? We stay at an emotional, immature level of our lives, and we never fully grow into emotionally healthy spirituality, which is God's goal for our life. That we would experience His love and be able to love others in that same way, that we would arrive at adulthood. Now, think about adulthood chronologically, right? Sometimes you would think like at adulthood, hopefully growth has fully happened. Hopefully of adulthood, like some of those phases in adolescence and in childhood, those phases that you say, well, they gotta get over it. It's just for the season that they're in. The mind is a little bit more developed. So now we have the capacity to kind of take on more and growth is happening. And so hopefully we're at a better state when we're adults. See, the hope is the same when we grow emotionally, that when we become an emotional adult is able to ask for what they need, what they want or prefer. They can do that clearly and honestly. They recognize and manage and take responsibility for their thoughts and feelings. And under stress, they can state their views, beliefs, and values without becoming upset or adversarial. Now let me just ask you, does anybody get a little bit upset when you're trying to fight for whatever it is you're fighting for? I mean, just think about this for a second, right? An emotionally healthy adult has the capacity to resolve conflict maturely and negotiate solutions that understand, not just their point of view, but also the perspective of others. It's growing emotionally. It's growing into emotional adulthood. Again, I ask you today, where are you on this? It's important for us to understand, because what I've learned over time is I find it fascinating that many times we can be in our 20s, we can be in our 30s, we can be in our 50s, chronologically, but yet emotionally, we can still be hovering around 5, maybe 3. I mean, depending on what day it is and how much sleep we've had, maybe 2. I mean, think about it. Right? That sometimes this is the case for our life. It wasn't just our life, but it was the lives of those that Jesus actually interacted with in His day. And what's so strikingly odd is it wasn't just the average people that Jesus connected with that had the same issue. It was the religious people. It was church people. It was those that said that they loved God. Those that said that they were following God. They had this understanding of spiritual maturity, but you know what they were lacking? Emotional maturity. They wanted to love God, but you know what? They somehow disconnected everything else from loving God. And then I'll think about this for a second, right? They understood what to do. Many of the religious leaders that Jesus had contention with, or that Jesus often had to address, listen, they were diligent, they were zealous, right? They were totally committed to God. They memorized whole books of the Bible. They gave way more than 10% of their income. They prayed more than 5 times a day. They talked about God. They held each other accountable for following God. They were really spiritually mature, but again, they were emotionally immature. Why? Because unlike Jesus, they didn't do well with people. Unlike Jesus, they did not delight in people. Unlike Jesus, they weren't approachable. They weren't warm. They weren't kind. They weren't displaying a God-honoring love. They for some reason, they took their high knowledge of spirituality and following God and disconnected it with their interactions with loving people. In fact, I want to draw your attention to Luke chapter 10, a fascinating scenario that's actually going to help us to continue to learn what it means to love well as we continue to grow in our emotional understanding as well as our spiritual maturity. Luke chapter 10, again, setting up the scene. Jesus is tested yet again. He's tested with an expert in the religious law. And this expert in religious law, you know what he says to Jesus? He says, Jesus, I have a question for you. What do I need to do to inherit eternal life? Just tell me like the 3 steps, the 2 steps, the 5 steps. Just give me clues on what I need to do to secure, as if you could do something for yourself, he assumes, to inherit eternal life, right? That this inheritance is something that has been given to you because somebody else has done something for you. He says, I just want to know, what do I got to do to get that? Now, it's fascinating because Jesus, his response probably caught him off guard. Jesus says, well, hey, you're the expert in religious law. You know the answer. What does the law say? And so the man responds with what we talked about earlier. He gives the greatest command. He says, you are to love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul, and you are to love your neighbor as yourself. And so Jesus' response was like, that's correct.
do that and you'll live. You got it right. Like, do that and you'll live. But it's interesting that this religious expert, he wanted a little bit more from Jesus. It's as if he wanted Jesus to give him an attaboy or Jesus to say, hey, you are crushing it, man. You are knocking it out of the park. That's what it means to follow God. Just do that one thing. But he didn't get that from Jesus. Jesus kind of left him hanging in a sense. And so he leans in, and in verse 29, he says, but he wanted to justify himself. He wanted to make sure that he really got this right and that he was doing the right thing. So he asked Jesus a question. He says, Jesus, who is my neighbor? Now, it's a fascinating question, right? Jesus, who is my neighbor? It's a fascinating question because this lawyer, he wants to know, what's the scope that I have to work within to actually love my neighbor? In other words, is everybody my neighbor? Is only some people my neighbor? Are only my favorite people my neighbor? Which is fascinating because he had a certain definition of neighbor in his own mind that was strikingly different than the idea that Jesus had. In other words, this religious expert was thinking to himself, I've actually taken good care of my neighbors. I've actually taken really care of my people. I've taken good care of the Jewish people living in the context of my world and the domains that I live within. Understand this. There's a cultural background situation going on here. This is a cultural question, right? There are some in first century culture that had been taught that you're not supposed to help someone that you considered to be not like you. You're not supposed to come alongside people who are radically different from you. In fact, societies in biblical days were strongly tribal, in which you would identify with your people and you would stay away from anything that constituted those people, right? I know we wouldn't be anything like that today, but just kind of go there with me. Just kind of imagine it for a second. So the question then is this attempt to create a distinguishing argument, arguing that maybe there's some people who are my neighbor and there's other people who are not my neighbor. It's interesting that we want that to be the case, don't we? I mean, that starts to mess with us when we actually think about it. We oftentimes want to challenge Jesus and justify ourselves with our actions, hoping that somehow Jesus is going to be cool with what we've decided, that Jesus is going to be okay with the way that we interpret things and we understand things. We want Jesus to match up with us instead of us aligning with Jesus. But I want you to lean into Jesus' response because, again, Jesus is talking to you and I. Jesus is actually talking to a religious person. He's talking to the ones that are saying that they're following God, that would in turn would say that we're going to follow you. And Jesus' reply is fascinating. In reply, Jesus said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and then he was attacked by robbers. Now you're like, what happened? Like, that's not an answer. Jesus breaks out into a story. He begins to tell a parable, this made-up story, to help illustrate what love actually looks like. He says, so you have a guy. We don't know a lot about the guy, but he's traveling from Jericho to Jerusalem, from Jerusalem to Jericho. He's attacked by robbers, and they stripped him of his clothes, and they beat him, and they went away, leaving him half dead. This road from Jerusalem to Jericho was an interesting road. It was a 17-mile journey that was notorious for being a road that was dangerous. There were actually cliffs along the side of this road where thieves would hide in those cliffs, and they look for an opportunity to prey upon the unsuspecting or choose to get what they could from people. And in this case, it says that they jumped out and they apparently stripped the man of his clothing and they beat him and they robbed him and they leave him for dead. Now imagine, Jesus is setting up a scenario here. He's giving a picture or a scene of something so significant. And then he goes on and he says this. He says, a priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. To which everybody would have gasped, because why would a priest do that? But Jesus continues, so too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, he too passed by on the other side. To which you got to call a timeout and say, well, wait, what's going on? Jesus is saying, yeah, understand this. Religious people, God-honoring people, they know all the right things. They do all the right things. A priest is a high-ranking official within the temple of God, right? He has access to the Holy of Holies, places that the average person doesn't have. He's supposed to know it all. He's like the pastor of all pastors, right? Like he's got to have this all right. And a Levite was kind of this temple assistant. The Levite would come alongside the priest with helping with certain religious duties. And sometimes that had to do with music. And sometimes that had to do with other religious practices. And so the priest and the Levite, they should have known better. They should have been the people that were actually exhibiting love, that were living out the idea of love. But as Jesus has them all kind of hanging on the edge of their seat, he takes things up a notch and he says in verse 33, but a Samaritan, as he traveled, he came to where the man was, and when he saw him, he looked upon him and he had pity. He looked upon him with pity. He takes pity. In other words, Jesus says a Samaritan comes along, and unlike the priest and the Levite, he actually is moved. He actually leans in. There's something that stirs up in his heart, right? There's a compassion that breaks out. And it's crazy because those that were listening to this story, they would have been taken aback because they were like, a Samaritan. Jesus says this was a Samaritan. A Samaritan, understand this, would have been considered for this religious expert a non-neighbor, right? He's a non-neighbor. We don't have Samaritans, we don't come close to Samaritans. In fact, there was extreme hatred between the Jews and Samaritans. Jews wouldn't even travel through Samaria. They would go around the outside just so they wouldn't get close to a Samaritan, because Samaritans were considered impure. Samaritans were considered to have all these diluted religious beliefs. Samaritans couldn't possibly love God, but yet in this moment, Jesus is saying that this Samaritan, he's actually the hero. He's the one that actually comes alongside the one who's broken. He's the one that actually comes alongside the one who's in need. He's the one that actually comes alongside and exhibits compassion. He's moved to take action out of, get this, love. How did that love look? It says that he went to him and he bandaged his wounds. He poured oil on him and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey. He brought him to an inn and he took care of him. He goes on, he says, the next day he took out 2 denarii or 2 small coins. He says he gave them to the innkeeper. He said, look after him, he said, and when I return, I'll reimburse you for any extra expense that you may have. He goes on and he says, which one of these 3 do you think was the neighbor to the man who fell to the robbers? Now it's fascinating, right? I love how Jesus does this. Jesus is presented with a question. Who is my neighbor? And Jesus says, well, I got a question for your question. Okay? And it's which one of these 3? After I paint a picture for you, after I give you some visual imagery, as I try to make the gospel of Jesus Christ, as I try to make the love of Jesus tangible to you, which one of these 3 was the neighbor? To which the expert's response was, well, the one who had mercy on him. And Jesus says, go and do likewise. Understand that. Go and do likewise. He's confronted with this expert. The expert is trying to justify himself. The expert listens to Jesus. He sees that a Samaritan, the least likely. I mean, think about the person that you can't stand right now. Think about the person that you would say, I just don't want to ever see them again. Jesus is saying it's that person who actually, out of compassion and love, chooses to act when those that actually say that they're better than, those that would think that they know how to do better than, those would think that they're more religious than, guess what they did? They walked on the other side. They chose to avoid the issue. They chose to skirt around for the sake of just their own complacency, their own convenience, or whatever it was. Maybe they had their own excuses. Maybe they were in a hurry. Maybe they were just coming from church and they had another appointment to get to. Whatever it was, they made the choice to not act. But Jesus calls to a question, who is the neighbor? And immediately the expert says, well, it was the one who had mercy, as if Jesus would say, so you do understand this. Oh, so you do know this. You do know what love is supposed to look like, but are you living it out? Which Jesus says, if you understand what love looks like, and if you know what compassion is, and you know how to treat others who are not like you, then go and do likewise. Do exactly what I've commanded you to do. See, Jesus is pointing out in this parable that it's very easy for you and I to live a disconnected spiritual life. Where you and I, we know all the right things about God, and we say we love God, but we're terrible when it comes to other people. We're terrible in our relationships with other people. But Jesus is saying that you have to understand something, that loving God and loving your neighbor is not separate. It will always be connected. Another way you can say that is that your love for God is a reflection of your ability to love other people. If you're going to say you love God, that should translate into you loving other people. Now you say, I don't know, I just feel like there's certain people in my life that I just can't stand, and I just can't get over it, and I don't know what to do. Understand me. Hear when I say this. If you want to continue to point back to the scripture of the good news that we are a new creation in Christ, then you have to begin to live into what that new creation looks like. In other words, there's a new paradigm that comes with that understanding that you and I have been called to live with a different mindset, not a cultural mindset, but a kingdom mindset. mindset where we understand that God is first, that our relationship with him matters. And as God loves us, we are now to live that out, loving other people. So my question for you is, what does it look like to go and do likewise? What would it look like for us to go and do likewise? Today I want to talk in our last few moments together about 4 marks of learning to love well. 4 marks of learning to love well that I actually see displayed in this story. That as you look at the story of this Good Samaritan, you look at the story of someone who was willing to live out love. You look at this story of someone who wasn't willing to shy away of actually getting involved, but actually chose to love well. I think there's some key pieces that you and I can learn. In fact, the first one would be this. It's understanding that love chooses to act even though you know it's going to cost you something. Love chooses to act even though you know it's going to cost you something, right? Think about this. Jesus said, again, you know the right thing to do, but are you actually living it out? You know what you're supposed to do, but are you living it out? In other words, Jesus is asking, does love actually mark your life? Or are you simply living too afraid to love well because you think love's going to require too much from you? That loving is too hard, that loving is too difficult, loving is too costly. Understand this, God's love, it goes beyond feeling and it chooses action. It goes beyond just an understanding and a definition, and it chooses to get involved. The priest and the Levite, they both see this guy there. They both know that there's a cost to helping, but they both aren't willing to pay that price. They're not willing to give of themselves, and instead they choose to leave it to somebody else. Isn't that what we always do? Well, I don't have the time. I don't know that I can do this. I don't know that I can invest in that right now. I'm not sure that I can make that happen, but I'm sure somebody else will. I'm sure somebody else will come alongside and do that, right? We always think that we can kind of, pass love over to somebody else and somebody else will love better than we will. No, you've been commanded and commissioned by God. You've actually been empowered by God to actually live out love. And understand this, love will cost you something. It cost this Samaritan something to love well, to move with compassion, to come alongside someone who was broken, someone who was hurt, someone who needed help. It was a sacrifice, right? He made a sacrifice. It wasn't just a sacrifice. He chose to invest money. He took him to a place to stay, and he actually paid for his room and said, hey, if there's anything else, if he orders room service, you know what I mean? Like if he gets that expensive bottle of water, you know what I'm saying? Like the $10 bottle, like just let me know, I'll come back, I'll take care of it. Why? Because I'm choosing to love. But you know what's most significant? You know what I love about the Samaritan? He chose to invest his time. It just simply cost him some time. It cost him being intentional about the things that he's willing to be involved in. He didn't say, my schedule's too busy. He didn't say, I'm actually on my way to an appointment, but I don't have time. He says, no, I'm going to make time. Understand that about your time. You own your time. You get to manage your time. Nobody can do that for you. You're intentional about what you choose to do and what you choose not to do. My encouragement to you is that you would choose to love. That you would choose to take time to invest in love because you understand that love will cost you something. In fact, I would ask you today, who is it that you know that God is calling you to love right now, to invest into right now? Is there a relationship that you know it's going to cost you, but God is inviting you to choose to invest, to choose to take that next step? Love will cost you something. Love also chooses to risk even though there's a potential of getting hurt. Love chooses to risk even though there's a potential of getting hurt. See, there was a risk to this Samaritan's journey. There was a risk not just only to give his time, but the risk was stopping on this notoriously dangerous road. I mean, how does he know this isn't a setup? How does he know that, the guy has not been beat up and he's got like fake, scuffs on him and the robbers are waiting for him to stop and help and then they're going to rob him too. I mean, how does he know this? He doesn't. But he doesn't have necessarily that thought in his mind. He's not thinking that somebody's out here to get me. What he's doing is he's choosing to move out of love and say, you know what? I'm gonna count the cost. I'm gonna choose to invest, but I'm also willing to take the risk. Now, again, it was a calculated risk. He wasn't doing anything crazy. I'm sure he made sure that there were witnesses there. I'm sure he made sure that everything was, was in a well-lit area. I don't know. But the reality is what we do know, he was willing to risk. Do we do the same when it comes to our love? Are we willing to take a risk even though it's going to get hurt? Or do we just kind of push back and say, you know what? I've resigned myself to never allow myself to get hurt again. How many times have you said that? I'm not going to love anymore. I'm not going to put myself out there anymore because I risk too much and I'm not going to allow myself to get hurt again. Here's what I need you to understand. You will never experience the fullness of love, nor will you ever be able to give love genuinely unless you are willing to take a risk. Unless you're willing to take a risk. Love is a place of vulnerability, a place of transparency. Love is a place where you have to put yourself out there, where you have to kind of lean in and knowing that because I live in a world where no one is perfect, yes, there are some times that I am going to be hurt, but you know what? Love is always worth the risk. It's always worth taking that next step. Love also chooses to honor even when differences and disagreements exist. Love chooses to honor when differences and disagreements exist. See, for Jesus, love is a non-negotiable, right? It wasn't like if it's just convenient for you. It wasn't if just like, again, you had enough time. It wasn't if you felt like, you can risk that cost. No. Love was a non-negotiable, especially as it relates to those who were different than you, those that disagreed with you, those that you did not see eye to eye with. And it's important for us to understand that because if we don't, then we fail to see something so significant. We fail to see the fact, first of all, that you and I have been created in the image of God. That you and I are made in the likeness of God. And so we are supposed to display that likeness into the world around us. How do we display that likeness into the world around us? We recognize that not just us, but every single person on this planet has too also been made in the image and likeness of God. And because they are image bearers of God, we see them with value, with worth, with dignity. They deserve honor. We deserve to come alongside them. They deserve our best instead of just simply choosing to see them as an it, where we just take from it, or we take from them, or they exist to serve us. No, we see each other as we are both connected. Why? Because believe it or not, whether it's Jesus' follower or not, He created us and we are a part of His family, and He wants us to be together. He wants us to know Him. He wants us to live as the family of God. See, we like to demand oftentimes that people would just see it the way we want to see it and do it the way we want them to do it. That's why we get so frustrated with the disagreements. That's why we get so frustrated in not seeing eye to eye. We somehow convinced ourselves that we're always right. And so because we're so inward focused on our own opinions and our own thoughts, then really true relationships don't exist. Because we say, if you can't think like us and you can't act like us and you don't believe like us, then guess what? We don't have no time for you. But I believe that God is challenging you today. I believe that God has challenged you to see the value in other people in your life. I believe that God is challenging you today to see the value that there are people in your life that maybe you have pushed away. Just think of the last 12 months. People that used to be your friends. People that you used to hang out with and talk to, but for whatever reason in the last 12 months, because of maybe a political decision or because a view on racism or because something that they posted on social media. Now suddenly you're like, I don't know. You're different than I thought you were. Now I don't know that we can hang out anymore. No, it just means that you're human and you have differences and you have disagreements. But in those differences and disagreements, if you're willing to lead with love, to lean in and have hard conversations, to lean in and come alongside one another, guess what? God's presence actually fills that empty space. That disconnect between you, God fills that space. In fact, genuine love is released. And when the genuine love is released in relationships, God's presence is tangible. God's power is there. And it's God that works to mend those things together to help us continue to love one another despite the disagreement and differences. And lastly, love chooses to seek peace instead of picking fights or holding grudges. I wonder how many grudges we've got right now. I wonder how many of us are content to just continue to fight for our rights and fight over issues and fight against people instead of actually coming alongside and trying to gain some kind of understanding and loving one another. In fact, Matthew 5:9, Jesus says that blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are the peacemakers, that God is a God of peace. And so blessed are the peacemakers. The problem with our peacemaking is so many of us are so fearful of conflict. We're so fearful of hard conversations. We're so fearful of having to sit down and be honest and vulnerable and transparent with another person or other people in our life that we want to push it away. And we think that somehow we're creating peace by not having the conversation. We're creating peace by not addressing the issue. Let me help you to understand something. Peace is not passive. Right? Peace is not passive. Peace is not saying, you know what, I'm gonna forsake my peace for the sake of others' peace. No, that's not peace. That's inner turmoil. That's inner frustration. God is inviting you to lean in. This is about having emotionally healthy conversations. This is about saying, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to meet with you, I'm going to talk with you. We're going to try to work through some of our differences. At the very least, here's what we're going to do. We're going to choose to love. Why? Well, because we're growing spiritually and we're growing emotionally. We're pursuing emotionally healthy spirituality. Now, I get this. I understand. Just in our last few moments together, I want you to understand something so incredibly significant. Everything that I'm talking about right now in these 4 ways to love well, it's incredibly hard and difficult. I get it. I understand that. I get it. But here's what I need you to understand. And it might not be something that you're ready for, but it's a bit of a twist that I hope that you fully embrace and totally understand here today. The only way that living a life of love makes sense, the only way that we're going to learn to love well, the only way that we're going to grow into an emotionally healthy adult and begin to live these things out is to understand the reality of the story that we talked about today. To understand the reality of what Luke talked about in chapter 10, we understand that you and I, we're the guy that has been beat and left on the road for dead. That you and I, we're the ones that are broken. You and I, we're the ones that were hurting. You and I, we're the ones that were left without. You and I are the ones that were stripped of everything and left to be hopeless. But Jesus himself is our Good Samaritan. Jesus himself chooses to come from heaven to earth. He chooses to invade our life. He chooses to move into the neighborhood. He chooses to come alongside us. He chooses to take a risk. He knows the cost. He's going to give his life, but out of his love for you, he says, I want your wholeness. I want your health. I want to grow you. I want you to become all that I've dreamed for you to be. And so he comes alongside and he invades our life so that we can have a relationship with him, a relationship of love, a relationship of grace, a relationship with mercy, and so that we can extend that to the lost and dying world around us. You see where I'm going with this? Jesus is the hero in the story. Jesus comes and he invades our life, which is why this day is so significant. See, I don't know what day you're watching this, but you know what? This weekend, we're celebrating Palm Sunday. And Palm Sunday is a significant day. Why is it a significant day? Because Palm Sunday is the beginning of Holy Week. It's when Jesus, he was riding in on a donkey into Jerusalem and he looks out over the people. He sees people cheering and shouting Hosanna, but yet people are so disconnected. People are living compartmentalized lives. People are so fragmented in their emotions and in their spiritual understanding. And Jesus is just like, if you just truly knew what you needed, if you just truly knew what a relationship with me could do in your life, oh man, things could be so different in your life. We know that Jesus, as he rode in, just a few short days, things quickly turned. And Jesus would ultimately give his life. He would pay the price. Love would pay the price for our sin, our guilt, our shame. And because he did, we would be afforded the opportunity to be in a love relationship with Jesus, a love that lasts and never, ever ends, to which Jesus says, I'm commanding you to love. John 13, a new command I give you. Love one another as I have loved you. You must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my, what is the goal? Disciples. Learning the ways of Jesus if you love one another. If you don't get anything else out of today, here's what I want you to understand. As Jesus followers, we should be people who love the best because we have been loved the best. So our prayer today, Jesus, teach us how to love like you loved. Father, I thank you for today. I thank you for your love. I thank you for that grace. I thank you for your mercy. I thank you, God, that you came alongside us, God, in our brokenness, in our pain, in our hurt. God, and you bring healing. God, you restore our wounds. God, you restore our life. God, you make us new and you're willing to grow us into all that you've created us to be. And so, Father, I pray once again that we would be faithful to follow you, to trust in you, to surrender our lives to you. And we thank you for all that you're going to do in us and through us. In Jesus' name, amen.